Yo, what's up, and welcome back to the number one Memphis Grizzlies postgame show. And it's not close, but we're not in the postseason, and neither is nobody else. We're finally all here together as the Celtics have one of the most boring championship ever. Probably the one to be the most boring parades ever. They went down to Miami. They can't even stay in their own city. Who are these guys? But anyway, tonight we have a conversation that's all going to be about the NBA draft. And I have a lot of questions myself. We have on Chip Williams here with Bluff City Media. So if you have any questions for him, when you hit the comment, go ahead and put in there hashtag Ask Chip. That way I can see it. I can pull it to the side. Even though during the off season we don't have as many comments as we normally do during the regular season, we're doing post game shows. But as you know, we're gonna have our main guy in as Nate. He hasn't had the baby yet, so he's still here. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hit the show. Yo, baby. Nate, no baby, no problems just yet. What's up, man?
Oh, I got problems, just not a baby. Plenty of problems. Number one, having to be on this show with you. I'm just playing. Excited to be here, but really not because of you. Excited because of the guy over here.
Okay. Well, listen.
Wow.
Show your hands. God, I don't know what you're doing at their table, but Chip is here with us. Chip Williams, what's up, man?
What's going on, guys? Always a pleasure, man. You guys are the best, so appreciate you having me on again.
Listen, I won't say that we love Ryan less than you, but we all really know who the real guy is, and that is yourself. Even though you look so much like Ryan, and every time I see y'all guys, I laugh out loud. It's the funniest thing. So it's good stuff. But how much prep work have you put in? Like, is this like every day you're looking at something different with the draft?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I try to watch. My goal is to watch at least one game per day. And so on the weekends, I can knock out a few more games. I try to read a little bit of what other people are saying, just kind of gauge, like, especially when my evaluation of a guy is off from maybe what the general consensus says. I will try to go read what people are writing, and maybe I missed something, maybe I didn't watch the right game or whatever. But yeah, it's just about an everyday thing. My wife looked at me 2 weeks ago and was just like, so how much longer? Like, how much more do we have to this draft? And I was like, just a couple more weeks. We're fine. Don't worry about it. We can do like normal things in about a month. So give me some time.
Yeah, as the Black Ninja DJ says, like, his opinions change every day. And we had, I guess, your big board prior to today. I'd had it probably the last 2 weeks, just looking through it and just kind of getting ready for, any questions I might have had for either Ryan or yourself. And today you sent me a new one, and there's not a ton of changes per se, like people falling in and out. But there were a lot of movement, which is interesting. And I want to ask a bunch of questions because there's some names that Ryan was complete opposite on, which is always great to see that. It's going to make for good banter during the show for sure. But I will say that there's a guy that I'm targeting that I want to talk to you about, but I'm going to hold my opinions first or last because I want to go ahead and get to your big board. And so let's go ahead and get a look at it right now because there's no reason to kind of beat around the bush. Listen, this looks so much. Let me show you Ryan's big board. So you appreciate the work I put in today. All right. So this is Ryan's big board. Everybody can see it. That's what it looked like. I know I tried my best, but Chip, only for you, I did this. Does this not just look so better? Like, I tried harder this time, and sometimes you fail, but sometimes you kind of figure things out and you get better. So Chip, let's go over the complete overview of your board. Anything that kind of you want to hit on before we kind of start picking it apart and start asking some questions about it?
Yeah, I mean, my guy in this class has been Ron Holland pretty much from the start. I was a huge fan of his coming out and back when he was at Duncanville in Texas, and then obviously chose the G League Ignite path. And, for whatever reason, he continues to be mocked either in the back half of the top 10 or even the late lottery. And you'll even find a mock or two where he's outside of the lottery. And so I guess it's just going to be one of those years where I'm going to end up higher on him, then it seems like what the consensus is right now. So that's probably the biggest differential that I have from the mainstream. Zachary Risachet, I have him a little bit lower than a lot of the mainstream guys. I have him down at 11. You'll hear him talked about in contention with the number 1 overall pick. ESPN had a number 1 overall for a long time. I disagree with that a little bit. So, but I will say just, overall, I think kind of the thing that you want to keep in mind throughout this is, for me personally, this has maybe been the most difficult year to rank guys, because in previous years, there's a clear consensus, number 1, number 2, sometimes even 3, 4, 5. And it's obvious, right? There's franchise changing players. And I think this draft has been labeled weak because there is not that franchise changing guy. I think there's a lot of really good players in here, but I found it really hard because I sit there and tinker with it, and I can, move a guy up and jump him ahead of someone else. And there's just a lot of parity in these tiers with these guys. So I found it really difficult. And at times I just kind of have to back away and say, hey, I've enough tinkering with the board today. We'll look at it again with fresh eyes tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm looking at is like I see this, and there's a lot of movement everywhere. What that screams to me is that nobody just has fallen in love with a guy yet. And if they have, they've kind of just said, you know what, we're not going to show all of our cards just yet. And I think that's the most important part is, why would you show all your cards? It doesn't make sense. But let's go ahead and start with Atlanta with 1, because I think that obviously is going to flip the draft and send it in a direction that we're going to see it, kind of go one way or the other, because, Sarr has been the number 1 guy that everybody's pointed to. And obviously, if we look here, Sarr is your 3rd overall rank. But if you're looking at the Atlanta Hawks, there's been some rumors about Donovan Clingan now, but, Sarr has been there at the top for the most part. I don't know if Holland has any chance to go 1 there for them. It's not a guy that they would need. Unless I trade it out, but I just don't see somebody would jump that high to go get a Ron Holland. But what's your thoughts on what they're doing down in Atlanta? Because I think that's going to be the biggest thing and the biggest question overall in this entire draft.
Yeah, they're fascinating, right? I mean, they obviously jumped up really high. They were slated to pick, I think they jumped from 11 to 1 maybe, or 10 to 1. I mean, they were basically knocking on the door of a play-in and end up with the number 1 overall pick. And now the question is, DeJounte Murray, Trae Young, what does that look like long term? Are they going to break that up, trade one of them, maybe even trade both of them? They're fascinating. They've got a really big offseason coming up for the trajectory of their franchise. And, unfortunately for them, there's probably not the guy if they wanted to, quote unquote, blow it up and try to start a rebuild. This is probably the wrong draft to land the number 1 pick, right? There's not a Cade Cunningham, a Wemby, a Zion, someone like that you feel like, hey, we've got the number 1 guy possibly on a title team. Let's build our core around him. So for them, I think the Clingan stuff is really interesting because what he did at UConn was really operate a lot in the high post, a lot of dribble handoffs, excellent screen setter, really good passer. And I could see him being a really nice complement to Trae Young if they decide they want to keep him and have those two kind of grow together over the next few years. Risachet, he's been kind of slipping a lot, not so much in the conversation. And Alex Sarr is, the one that I think for a long time we almost thought a foregone conclusion. He's going to go 1. That's who Atlanta's taking. He's got a little bit of a history there. He spent some time with the Overtime Elite, which is based in Atlanta. So he's at least somewhat familiar with Atlanta. And I think the sell there is like, are we getting this Jaren Jackson, Evan Mobley, game-changing, switch 1 through 5, protect the rim? And I think that's the sell, the defensive side, right? Where the questions come in is like, okay, well, what is he on offense, right? Because he does all this stuff. Like, he dribbles a little bit. The touch looks good on the shot. He scores in the paint a little bit, but none of it's that good, right? It's all kind of theoretical at this point. So he would definitely be the quote-unquote upside swing, where if it pans out, you may end up with a guy like an Evan Mobley or even a Jaren Jackson. But I do understand why, for them specifically with Trae, if they pick Donovan Clingan, it'd be a surprise, but I get it from their perspective. And this is the year where there's not the obvious guy. So it's kind of beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. And I'm going to, there's a lot of questions that are coming in about the Grizzlies. And so just to give everybody a heads up, we're going to spend about 20 minutes at the very beginning of the show just talking about just the NBA draft as a whole. And then we'll pivot into more of the Grizzlies style stuff, because I do want to obviously ask about the Grizzlies stuff, but I want to be able to get the entire, I guess, the idea of your draft board, which direction you see it going and why, because honestly, like, we can say whatever we want about the Grizzlies, but we're picking at 9. There could be trades. There could be trades up, but back, honestly. But I want to know more about what you're thinking of the other teams and these actual prospects, because that would help us kind of, I guess, understand where the Grizzlies should go or will go. And so I want to keep asking about that. Nate, do you have anything, any questions?
My main question, because of the parity in the draft, is who's been the hardest guy for you to place when you're going through this? Like, who's the guy that you ended up having to put him here, but you feel like that could be the biggest swing where you look back on this draft and you say, that was a miss?
That's a really good question. I would say Nikola Topic, the Serbian point guard. I see why people are so high on this guy. Like, you put him in a pick and roll and you get him going downhill, it's special, man. Like, he can get to the rim and finish, but the passing, the creation, like, it's all there. I get it. Now he tears his ACL. What are you supposed to do with that? It seems, ACLs maybe aren't what they once were, where it was like, this may be career altering. They're fairly routine. Guys tear their ACLs, but it's a concern, right? Like, you prefer your high draft prospect not have a torn ACL his rookie season. So I ended up fairly high on him. I had him number 7. There are guys whose opinion I respect tremendously who have him in their top 2. And I don't know quite what to do with him. And so I put him at 7, partly out of the fear that he turns into this really good, 6'6", big point guard. Like, say he goes to the Spurs, right, and they pair him with Wembanyama. I could see him turning into an excellent point guard pairing with Victor Wembanyama for a really long time. So I've had a hard time with him. I'm generally high on him, but the ACL tear, and then he switched from the Adriatic League to the Euro League, and the numbers weren't quite as good. So, like, there's a little bit of conflicting data there on exactly what level of prospect he is.
Hey, on that, Chip, if he were to fall to the Grizzlies at 9, is he a guy that I know that he is, 7th on your board, but if he was to fall due to the ACL issue, would you be scared to take him? Because obviously the Grizzlies their window is open right now of win now mode. They could obviously make a decision and say, hey, at 9, he fell to us, let's take him. Or we could trade out of that because obviously he might be a high commodity falling down that low. Somebody want to jump up. That's a whole nother conversation. But would you be like open and excited about taking him at 9, knowing that he probably couldn't even play for you this upcoming season, but really having him be kind of like a draft and stash guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he would be interesting because he is 6'6" with this 6'6", 6'7" wingspan, and he doesn't have to exclusively guard point guards, right? And so that would allow him to play on the floor with Ja, with Marcus Smart, with Desmond Bane. Like, that size, he has positive positional size, right? And the Grizzlies are a team that is frankly lacking a lot of positive positional size. Outside of Jaren and really Gigi now, I guess, there's not a ton of guys who are tall or long for their position. And he is. So that, from that perspective, yes. And I would also say the Grizzlies are a whole lot better at this than me. So if they like Topic and they're cool with all the medical stuff, then so am I.
I like that. And that's honestly, us fans, we don't say that enough. And I know you've said that many a times on Twitter. But honestly, us fans don't say that enough because it's simply like we think that we're the smartest guy in the room. And then we realize like these guys are honestly very, very good at it.
I will say I felt smarter than the Grizzlies during the Chris Wallace era because they missed so often. And I was like, wait, no, this doesn't make sense. Pick this guy, right? But now that is no longer the case. So,
all right, let's go look back at your draft board again. And I know you have one, Nate, that you want to talk about at number 8. But before we get there, I want to talk about Reed Shepard and Dillingham, and I want to talk about them together, and you can kind of separate them as you want. But you see the draft board here. Reed Shepard is at 2, but also Rob Dillingham is at 4. And so obviously the Kentucky guards, Chip, I'm curious why you're so high on them. I do think that they're good, and this is a NBA draft board, not a Grizzlies draft board, but an NBA draft board. And so why are you so high on them? Because I just think their size is really going to hurt them. But also, I look at the draft and I say the draft could be a little weak as well. So maybe that's why they're up.
I think for me, they're the 2 best shooters in the class. I think they're different in the way they get shots, right? But I think they're the 2 best shooters in the class. I think Reed, I watched a lot of Kentucky games. And I remember one night I was extremely tired and I was just trying to get through a game. And I pulled out my notes app on my phone and I typed Reed Shepard is special. And I just put the date next to it and I went to bed because I was like, I don't want to forget what I just watched because I think this guy has a chance to be the best player from this class. Wow. The shooting numbers he put up and just the overall efficiency and the impact he had on Kentucky is just stuff you don't see from freshmen, right? And at some point, you just have to trust the data and say, hey, this guy may not have the size I want. He may not have played point guard at Kentucky the way I would have liked to have seen, but the data is screaming at me. This guy is a special prospect. And I think when you watch, the eye test matches that. Like, he's so good with his hands on defense. He blocks shots at a ridiculous rate for someone his size. He can get his own shot. He can pass the ball well. And if you spot him up off ball, there's not a better player in this class. So does he need to play with probably a plus size point guard? Yeah, he probably does because he's going to have a hard time defending 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" guys, right? But I just think there's enough there where if I needed a point guard, I would give the keys to my franchise to Reed and say, let's figure this thing out together. For Rob, I was very concerned about Rob's height coming in because he looks pretty small on the court, right? He ended up measuring in at 6'1" without shoes on, and that was a good measurement for him. I was a little concerned it was going to be like 5'10" and a half, right? Like, that's not a lot of guys that big playing in the league. But he's so stinking quick, and his handle is so tight and so functional. Like, there are times where he'll pull off a dribble move, and I'm like, man, that's like almost some Kyrie Irving stuff. Like, he's not quite Kyrie, right? And when he gets in the lane, he can't finish quite like Kyrie, but he can get to his shot anytime he wants. He's never going to be a positive on defense, and that's why I prefer Reed to him, because I do think Reed brings some stuff defensively that Rob will just never have. But I think worst case scenario, you've got a really good microwave scorer off the bench in Rob Dillingham, and that's a valuable guy in a draft like this.
Yeah, Rob is amazing, and I see him being a guy that is the microwave scorer coming off the bench and just kind of establishing kind of maybe the tides where you can run with him and maybe everything works great, or if you see that he doesn't have it or he's just not a great matchup for that, you go ahead and go the other way and maybe go a different style, a different direction that night. But he is a guy that can definitely be your X factor each and every night. But Nate, I know you have the question about number 8, so go ahead and give it to you.
Well, there's a bunch of guys. And actually, Reed Shepard is one of these guys that I look at this draft, and I just feel like you're going to look up in a year and you're going to be like, yeah, how did we not know that guy was going to be good? Like, I think Ron Holland is one of them. I don't understand why he's slipping down draft boards. It's like hyper athletic wing with a crazy motor. Reed Shepard has absolutely elite shooting numbers. Devin Carter is a classic, like Miami Heat do it all type guard. But the other one for me is a guy who I have claimed as my guy in the draft. The Grizzlies don't walk away with him. I consider it a minor failure. And that is Day'Ron Holmes at number 8. Every time I watch anything with him, I'm like, he fits perfect with Memphis, but he's just a long, athletic big who has shown the ability to have some touch on his shot, can rim run, rebound, and protect. So when I look at him at number 8, this is the most exciting thing I've seen all of draft season, because that is who I want the Grizzlies to have. But I want to know your thoughts, because when I look at him, I'm like, how do we not know this guy is just going to be good from what we've seen? And I think he fits perfect with Memphis.
I agree with you. I think that sometimes guys, it's maybe a similar thing to like Desmond Bain, right? Like you watch Desmond Bain at TCU and you're like, yes, this guy can absolutely play in the NBA. What are we doing here? But he had a negative wingspan and he was old, right? And so I think sometimes we really just overthink this stuff. And I think that's what's happening with Day'Ron Holmes, right? Didn't play at a big time Power 5 conference, played at Dayton, but he looked like an NBA player at Dayton. He dunked everything. He can dribble the ball a little bit. He protects the rim like crazy. Like he passes some. When I watch him, I'm like, yeah, that guy can play in the playoffs. He's everything you want in a playoff big. And when I think a guy in this draft can play in the playoffs, you should be taking in the lottery, right? Like there's just not a ton of surefire playoff guys in this draft, and I'm completely aligned with you. I think Day'Ron Holmes is one of those guys.
Yeah. I wanted to let him go for a second before we told him he was on mute.
Oh my God, I did it again. So overlooking guys, that's what I want to get to. And so we're going to pull up this board again. This is a guy that I think that has been overlooked, but also on only on our boards, because I believe that he was low on Ryan's board. I'm going to pull him up right here. I don't even see him. There he is. He's at 13. And then you have him at number 20. And that is the Tennessee kid, Dalton Connect. And so this prospect just screams to me that he could be the Desmond Bain in this draft. And that's what I'm curious about. Is he being overlooked? Because honestly, he could be, just because he honestly hasn't produced enough, except for when he did get to Tennessee. But I just think that Dalton Connect has shown that he can be honestly a great player in the league, because he can shoot mainly, that's obviously going to keep him on the floor. But he doesn't, and I know he doesn't come off screens well and with this shot, and he has to have the ball in his hands. I think that stuff can change and develop for sure. But why are you maybe more lower on Dalton Connects than the consensus rankings?
Yeah, it's actually funny you bring him up. When I sent the board to you, I was like, man, I don't feel great about the Connect ranking, and it really stems from the fact that he's really old. And you go back and look at guys who are over 23 years old drafted in the lottery. It's not a list you want to be a part of, right? It's just there's not many success stories, to be completely honest with you. But I think the 1 year production where he exploded is a bit concerning, and he was obviously quite a bit older when he did that. At the same time, he did that in arguably the best basketball conference in America, and I think he's a good shooter. I don't think he's like this Corey Kispert elite shooter. I think he's got a little more scoring to him. I hate comparisons, but I call him the long lost Bogdanovich brother. Like he's just another one of these Bogdanoviches who's going to come in the league and be a professional scorer. So I would suspect by the time I'm done with my board, Connect's going to be a little bit higher than 20. That's just where I ended up with him today. I'm a fan, but the stuff about guys his age drafted in the lottery, it does concern me. I mean, that's just pretty much point blank period why I have him at 20.
It's kind of like the white Americans, like in the NBA. Like I just don't love them, and like especially in the draft in the top 10. Like there's literally been, and one of them is not Brooke Lopez. I did find that out last week. That was my bad. But there's only been 14 drafted since 2000, and there's only been 2 drafts where there's actually had 2 guys, white American, that have been drafted in the same draft, top 10. And we're looking at potentially Donovan Clingan, and potentially Reed Shepard, potentially Dalton Connect. That's 3 guys. I don't know. I didn't look back far enough, but it definitely has not happened since 2000. So I probably not going to happen, especially since they make up maybe 2% of the league. But there's not been many. And so I feel like I'm the same way on that. But all right, I have one question about just regular prospects overall. I believe, nope, here's one about the one prospect. So who is your sleeper prospect in the draft, a guy that you love, that we're all sleeping on way too much?
Jonathan Mogbo. I've got him in my top 20. I think this guy is, you talk about playoff guys, like I think Jonathan Mogbo is one of them. The massive knock on him is he's a little bit older, and he played at San Francisco, and he's short, right? He's about, when he puts shoes on, he's 6'7.5", 6'8", but he's got a really long wingspan, standing reach of right at 9 feet, and that's kind of the threshold you want to be at for a guy to be a quote-unquote rim protector. But he dribbles, he passes as good as probably any big man in this class and maybe any big man in the last couple classes, and he scores pretty much any way he wants. He dunked the ball, I think, 20 more times than Brandon Clark did his last year at Gonzaga. So, like, he dunks everything. And he rebounds off the chart numbers. Like, you just combine all of those things together, and that's what you want in a playoff big man. And so, again, he's short, and that's why he's probably ranked in the second round for a lot of people. But I just buy the film and I buy the numbers, and they say you should take this guy very high. So Bogbo's my sleeper. I would be stunned if he went in the second round where he's currently being mocked.
Wow. All right. We have a couple more that just came in. What's the biggest draft, pick prediction that you've made that's going to make you eat your words? What scares you the most about a prediction you've given?
Oh, man. I mean, the Ron Holland stuff for sure scares me, right? Because I'm kind of going against a lot of, where his trajectory is right now. It's trending down, and I'm holding firm with him as the best guy in this class. And, like, if he can't shoot and maybe the athleticism isn't quite what we thought, then, like, yeah, I could look pretty dumb, right? Like, Risa Shea or Sarr, one of these guys turns out to be a star, and I was, pounding the drum for Holland over both of them. I'll look like an idiot. Last year, I was very strong Scoot Henderson over Brandon Miller, and it was just their rookie years, but I look like an idiot for that. So it happens every year. I'm okay with it.
All right. Well, hopefully you don't, because I do like Ron Holland as well. All right. This is the last one before we move on to the Grizzlies stuff. But honestly, what's your thoughts on Devin Carter? His dad is on the Grizzlies bench as an assistant coach, Anthony Carter. So overall thoughts on Devin Carter?
Absolute dog. I love everything about him. Defends his freaking butt off, like deflections, steals. He'll block shots, even though he's small. He's got a crazy, DeAnthony Melton type wingspan. It's like 6'9", 6'10", and really developed his offensive game. Shot well, got to the paint, created for others. He was asked to do a lot on that Providence team, and he produced at a ridiculous level. His tape is some of my favorite in this entire class. He's awesome, and if that's who the Grizzlies went with at 9, I'd be extremely happy.
Nice. I like that. All right. This is a question that has nothing to do with the draft, but Wayne wants to know, just saw Dan Hurley, and so he was peeking at the league a little bit, but then other coaches that you would kind of see maybe making a jump. Like, is there anybody out there like, hey, this guy actually could make a jump from whether it's college or maybe overseas? We've seen that in the past, but anybody that you see that could be a guy that would make a jump to the league?
Yeah, Alabama's basketball coach, who Nate Oates. I had to literally just type his name into Google. It was escaping me. I think Nate Oates already runs an NBA system. The dunks, the threes, and the layups. Really, just the philosophies and the principles that have taken over the NBA the last decade plus. He's really implementing that at Alabama, and he's taken a program that, frankly, no one cares about Alabama basketball, and he's got them in the Final Four. So he's fantastic, and would not surprise me if he's in the NBA one day.
I like Nate Oates. All right, that's the only Nate I do like. All right, let's take a quick break real fast. 2 minutes, and we'll be right back, and we're going to talk all Grizzlies the rest of the way. 2 minutes. We'll be right back.
Speaking of getting rid of toxins, Kenny Stubblefield, David Jones.
Oh, wow.
Nah, I mean, depending on who you look at it. He may be a toxin to University of Memphis. The University of Memphis might be a toxin to him. In a very dramatic fashion, David Jones decided he will be taking his talents to the NBA. At around 10:55, man, it started feeling a little bleak. I text you. I said, Kenny, is there any hope?
I mean, he kind of, the writing's been on the wall, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, he said it to the Daily Memphians, Drew Hill, at the combine. If I get all
any inclination that I can get,
think at me the right way, I'll stay in the game.
You only have a very short window of time. I think that window is very small. I think you can get caught up in just becoming an amateur basketball player, and you can lose that window of opportunity.
Tune in to The Anthony Sane Show, Wednesdays and Fridays at 12 p.m. weekly on the Bluff City Media YouTube channel.
This has turned into unrealistic expectations for teams. Not every team is ready to win a championship. There are steps you got to take to put yourself in position to win it. And I thought that what they had done in Cleveland had become a team that was muddled in nothing. And JV, I thought they created a little bit of a culture. You were able to find a star player. I think it's tough. I go back to what happened with Adrian Griffin in Milwaukee. I mean, you got the second best record in the NBA, and they say, well, we don't know if you're the one to get us over the top. Yeah, but the guy you bring in is only 5-6 games over 500 from that point on. You would hope that realistic expectations start to come back into the fold, other than these unrealistic things that it's going to happen. Winning a championship happens just like that, because it didn't that way at all.
Tune in to the Night Court Podcast with your hosts, Rob Fisher and Brevin Knight, on the Bluff City Media YouTube channel.
Welcome back to Grizz 901. Make sure you tune in to our draft special that we're going to go through. At least the lottery, the extended time. We're going to get up to where the Grizzlies draft, whether it be maybe at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever they might end up drafting at, or whether they fall back. We're going to make sure we give you our complete NBA draft episode special. So we're going to talk about all the prospects as they're getting drafted, how they affect that actual team. And then as we get closer to where the Grizzlies are picking, or maybe any trade rumors that we might be having, we'll give you our insight there from either Chip or Ryan. We're going to kind of be popping in and out. And if Nate doesn't have his baby before then, he'll be on the show as well. So it'll be us three and then Ryan. And I'm telling you, as you can kind of see, that we're trying to move some things around. And so we're going to get some single shots, double shots, the triple shots, and eventually we'll go quad box as soon as the Grizzlies draft. We're going to go all four of us. That way we can break down the rest of the show through the entire lottery. That's it. We're going to break down the rest of the show all about the Grizzlies, but still give you a little bit more about the draft prospects. So let's go ahead and get into the Grizzlies in itself. And so I want to go ahead and start off the top, because I think this is the biggest Band-Aid I want to rip off. And that's going to be the Grizzlies' top 5 for you. So if you had to give us 5 guys that you're like, hey, if all 5 guys were there, this is kind of the order I would give, or these are the 5 guys I would choose from, however you want to do it. But who are your top 5 for the Grizz?
Yeah, I think number 1 for me, you may go 5 to 1 or 1 to 5.
Surprise me.
All right, let's go 1 to 5. That's easier for me. That way I can just I can read it the way I have it out. So number 1's Ron Holland. He's the best prospect in the draft, and I just don't think you can have enough guys like him, right? Like positive size for his position. He's a excellent defender. He brings energy that very few guys in the league will match, and I think he'd be great. Number 2 for me would be Alex Sarr. I just envision a world where there's possibly 2 Jarens roaming the floor.
Jeez.
And watching teams try to score on that would be a lot of fun. And so he would be very high on my wish list. Number 3 is obviously a name very familiar to a lot of Grizz fans. One of the most popular names is Donovan Clingan. I think that would signal that the Grizzlies liked what they had with Steven Adams, and they feel as though he can replicate a lot of what they had there. And, I always think it's worth noting Donovan Clingan is a lot bigger than Steven Adams is. He's a lot bigger than Jonas Valanciunas is. He is a different level of size and height than either one of those guys. So it would be different, but we've seen something similar work with, the core they have right now. Number 4 for me would be Reed Sheppard. I am incredibly high on him, and I think that he fits. I don't think there's a more quote-unquote Kleiman type prospect in this draft than Reed Sheppard. Really? And if he was 6'5", 6'6", I'd have him number 1, and I think the Grizzlies would probably be doing everything they could to go up and get him, because he's like Luke Kennard if you added some excellent defensive intangibles and also a little more ball handling as well. And then number 5 for me is Devin Carter. We touched on him a little bit earlier. Devin Carter I just think, brings that kind of mentality. He would ingratiate himself to Grizz fans. And, it's not perfect. I don't ever want to say, hey, Devin Carter, he can go replace Marcus Smart, who's a former Defensive Player of the Year. But similar type players, right? And if you wanted to move Smart to maybe do some different stuff with the way the roster is constructed, he could kind of step into that role to a lesser degree, certainly as a rookie, but they bring similar stuff, right? And we know they value that with a DeAnthony Melton and then going out and acquiring Smart. So that's my 5.
Is Devin Carter too high at 9?
No, not for me. Not at all. I think there's even a possibility he's not there at 9. I know that the Spurs like him, at least it's been reported. They like him quite a bit. They're at 8. So he may not even be there at 9. So for me, it is not.
Wow. Nate, what you got?
Out of those top 5, are there any of those guys that you think are not realistic for the Grizz at 9? AKA, you don't think the Grizz can get him unless they trade up?
Definitely Alex Sarr. I just don't see him getting out of the top 3. You're going to have to get all the way up there if you want a shot at him. And it seems like Donovan Clingan. I mean, I think at one point that was the most realistic target that, was going to be best player available, fits the need, and likely to be there. And it just doesn't seem like he's going to be there. I would have said Ron Holland maybe a month ago, but he's there in a lot of mocks, so it's very possible he's there. So, but definitely the 2 big guys, I think, there's a real good chance they're not there. Shepard, probably not, but you'll find a mock or 2 where he slips down to 9, 10, 11. So that's possible. Unlikely, but it's possible.
Is there anybody you're moving up for that you're like, hey, I'm willing to move up for this guy, because obviously you give us your top 5. But is there any of those guys you're like, hey, I'm actually willing to jump up for, and obviously the cost is the cost. We don't know what that is. And so it's hard to even, think about what that actual cost would be. But it's got to be a future pick, I would assume, plus a player or so. But is there anybody that you're like, hey, I'm willing to move up? They're worth it to me.
I think Shepard and Sarr are worth it to go up and try to get. I would say Holland is too, but it seems likely that you don't have to move up maybe more than a spot or 2 if you really want him. There's a pretty good chance he just falls in your lap. But Shepard and Sarr, I think, are pretty special prospects. And for the team construct of the Grizzlies, they make a lot of sense to grow with the core they have.
All right. Nate, you have anything else before we get to the questions right here?
I don't think so. The question that was coming up in my head is somewhat of an observation. I feel like a lot of these guys, you talk about, oh, they didn't pan out to what they're supposed to be. Oh, you talk about Scoot and how Scoot feels like a miss after 1 year. How much of it is it where these guys ends up going? Because it feels like if a guy goes to Denver or goes to a place like recently Minnesota, Oklahoma City, Memphis even, they have a good chance of becoming the best they could be. Whereas if a guy ends up in Portland, Washington, Charlotte, not so much. I mean, does that play a huge factor that people underrate in these drafts?
It's huge. Like it's massive. Like I don't want to say it's everything because at some level, there's a talent level that you have to have. And sometimes guys just get misevaluated, right? But yes, opportunities, situation, who you're playing with, what the locker room's like. Do you have the same coaching staff for multiple years? Is the same front office there that drafted you more than a year or 2? Like, are they going to take the time to invest in you, right? Like all that stuff is it's impossible to calculate until they actually get to that situation. But it's huge. Like these guys are all talented. They're all going as high as they are for a reason. And everything after that determines their career. Now, sometimes you just get Wemby, who put him on the Detroit Pistons and he's going to be, a 17-time All-Star, right? But there's no Wembys in this class. So, yeah, this class, maybe more than any other, fit is huge. I think that's an excellent point.
All right, let's give it an update real quick of what your actual draft board looks like, because I know Sane just got here, but also some others might be filing a little bit late. But looking at your draft board, obviously you have, Ron Holland followed by, Reed Shepard, Alex Sarr, Rob Dillingham, and Isaiah Collier. We haven't talked about Collier a little bit. I kind of want to stay away from that because I don't think he fits what the Grizzlies, really want in a player. And then so you're looking at the rest of these, and we talked about Day'Ron Holmes being Grizzly. That obviously your fifth best available for the Grizzlies would be Devin Carter. We haven't talked about Buzelis, and even Zach Edey. I know that we want to hit on him a little bit. Kyle Filipowski a little bit higher than I've seen him, but I don't love his fit just because his length isn't as long as I'd like, and I've watched him a whole year at Duke, or actually 2 years at Duke, and he pisses me off just in general. And so personally, I'd pass on him as any kind of a Grizzly player. But that's the draft board for Chip overall, and that's it's looking at the league in general. We just hit on how you had Holland as your number one, and then Sarr, followed by Klingon, and then Shepard, and then rounding out with Devin Carter at 5 there for the Grizzlies' top 5. And so I think that's a good look at the board of how it can change depending on who's up, because the board could shift because of, how's the team makeup and the fit, as you were just talking. But let's go ahead and look through a lot of these comments real quick that I know people are asking. And so the first one we're going to start off with is going to be from Blackman DJ. He wants to know, what direction do you see the Grizzlies leaning? And, they trade up in the first round at any point. Where do you see them as the front office? Maybe not what you would do, but what do you see maybe the front office would do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just have to look at Zach Kleiman's draft history. He goes up and gets who he wants, and I think if there's a guy that they feel won't be there at 9, they want him, they're going to go do what it takes to get him. They've proven that, throughout the history of his tenure. And generally, those trades have been in the 20s or in the 30s, a lot of second round move ups. But, we even go back to the year they drafted Zaire. They moved up 7 spots, and I think they were probably seemed like at the time targeting a different player, but it got them in a range to take a player that they were higher on that probably wouldn't have been there at 17. So until he doesn't trade up and does a trade back, I'm just going to keep saying he's going to trade up because that's what he does.
Right. Well, Draft and Stash has something they want to say to you, that only a draft psycho like Chip would have Jonathan Mogbo at 14. You'd love to see it. All right.
Yes, that he's correct. He's 100% correct.
All right, let's go from Wayne here. It's got 2 second-round picks, both unprotected, from OKC and Brooklyn. What are we looking for? You think there's a package that we could do to maybe get off of those or get something, or do you just keep them in draft? Because obviously the Grizzlies are at 14 players under contract, depending on what you can do with Kennard and others. But people want to bring back Lamar Stevens. People want to send out other people. But you have 3 potential draft spots here, and you're keeping your first rounder if you do draft somebody. So what do you do with the other 2? Is there any suggestions you like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always an advocate of when the guy slips in the second and it starts to get into the 30s, you do what you got to do to go get him, because the cost is usually not that high, right? So that is kind of the signature of the Kleiman era. That's, got up to 30 to get Santi, got up to 30 to get Bain, traded up in the 20s to go get Brandon Clark, Tillman. He goes up and gets who he wants, right? And he has a pretty good success rate of drafting in that range. So I would say the Grizzlies of any team should just keep accumulating second-round picks, because they do incredibly well in that round. And, yeah, the roster crunch, that's something you got to figure out. But the good thing is you got 3 two-ways now, if you want to let one of the guys on there go. It's hard, right? It's always a good problem to have when you have a lot of talented guys trying to make a defined amount of roster spots.
Yeah. The biggest, the 2 ways, I keep wanting to say the 3 ways, but the 2-way guys, the 3 2-way guys, I know that Grizzlies love, the 2 of the guys that they already have under the contract. So one of these guys could fit that, which would be great, but you still have the extra one. But I think moving up and grabbing somebody that does fall and moving them into that 3rd spot would be the perfect scenario for this. Looking at the kind of 1 to 3 players that we already have, being interchangeable, like the Smarts and guys like that. But the same approach with the 4 and 5. Like, who's a good multi-positional player in the draft this year? And I'm going to say other than Devin Carter, because I know is and can play multi-positional. But is there anybody else outside of Devin Carter that you like that could play, multi positions?
Yeah, I think a lot of these wings can. The 2 Ignite guys, Ron Holland, Matas Buzelis, they're kind of 3-4s who could even play like 2 if you really needed them to. Mogbo's a guy who can play either big spot Filipowski, who you touched on, another guy who can play either big spot. Cody Williams, a little further down my board. I think that as his body develops, you could maybe play him at some 4, but you could definitely play him at 2, 3. Bub Carrington, a guy we haven't touched on, he is great on or off ball. He can play either guard spot, and he's probably big enough to play 3 if you really needed him to. So there's quite a bit of these guys in this kind of late lottery range that would make a lot of sense and fit kind of what he's looking for there.
All right. He is Chip Williams. We're going to keep on going here. I have 3 questions right now. They've been kind of all coming in a flurry, but I know we want to ask just a few more questions and we'll kind of get you out of here. But the Black Ninja DJ wants to know about Stefan Castle there being a possible fit. He's obviously canceled so many kind of meetings and any kind of workouts, but he does have the size. He does have playmaking ability, but he wants to be a point guard. He's fallen down the draft board. He was the guy that was the favor of being top 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe, where the Grizzlies might have to jump up to grab him. Now he's fallen consensus wise out of the top 10. So any thoughts about Castle and him being there at 9? Would you love him, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm a fan of the player. I think the shooting is obviously the big concern there, right? And just really the ability to score in general, because I think the sell is that he's kind of this really strong guard who kind of gets to the rim, and he can do that, but he's not overwhelming people the way you'd want someone who's just, for now, really a non-shooting factor. Obviously, if he only wants to play point guard, that's going to be basically a non-starter for the Grizzlies. I kind of think some of that stuff's overblown. I kind of wish his agent would just be like, hey, man, just let's keep it cool for now. We want to get you drafted as high as possible. So you kind of need to do whatever these teams are asking you to do. But yeah, I mean, I'd be fine with it because like the defensive stuff is incredible. I think he's an absolute dog on that end. It really is just the offense that's very concerning. And it's really hard for non-shooting wings and guards to stay on the floor very long.
All right, same thing with Khalil Ware here. Too high at 9. He's obviously out of your top 20. But what's your thoughts on Khalil Ware?
Yeah, he's probably the first guy I left off. I think Khalil is, if he hits, he's a lot of the stuff you want out of a modern big because he can shoot a little, he can dribble a little, he really protects the rim pretty well. He's a good mover. I haven't seen him quite put it all together. And there was a question earlier about who scares me the most. It's probably Khalil Ware, because if he hits, like, he could be, I don't know, Miles Turner or something like that, right? And if Miles Turner's in this draft, you're picking him in the top 10, no problem, right? But there's also this, like, how hot does his motor run? I think he cleaned up a lot of that stuff and really answered a lot of those questions this past year at Indiana. A lot of that dates back to like Oregon, and stuff didn't go well there his freshman year. I got to watch more, to be honest with you, to rank him higher than I have him right now. I've watched some of it's really good, some of it's not as good, but more of a theoretical player at this point. For me, 9's a little high. And again, I just caveat that with, hey, the Grizzlies are better at this than me. So if they love him, he's probably great.
All right, last draft question we got here. You're talking about your dream scenario for the Grizzlies in the draft. We know it's Ron Holland. We know that. Okay, so at 9, you're just sitting there waiting, and you're just like, hey, Ronnie boy, come home to me.
Come on, Ron. Yeah.
But what else? Because obviously you have, the Grizzlies potentially having those 2 picks. Like, is there any other, scenarios within the draft that maybe like, hey, if this could happen, this is what I would love to happen?
Yeah, so there's a couple guys. We'll set 9 aside for a second, and yeah, that'd be awesome if Ron Holland just fell in their lap at 9. But like Jalen Tyson, who's a guard wing from Cal, currently being mocked in the 2nd round. Obviously, Jonathan Mogbo, another guy being ranked in the 2nd round, and Isaiah Crawford from Louisiana Tech, who's like the closest thing I've seen to Vince Williams since Vince Williams. If any of those guys are sitting there at 39, and that's who they select, I will be thrilled, because I think they got a guy who's got a chance to be a playoff player in the 2nd round, and we can all fire off the tweets that say, hey, King Kleiman has done it once again. He's gotten us a rotation guy in the 2nd round. So that would be my dream scenario.
All right, so I love that, because Isaiah Crawford there at 18 on your big board, Jalen Tyson at 16, and who you said Mogbo at 14. So you're talking
Yeah.
about, you know, 3 guys in your top 20 that just falling in your lap would be a dream scenario. So I like that. All right, last thing. This is more the Grizzlies as a whole. You're looking at the actual team. What do you think they're going to, you know, what's your feel about them in the free agency? You know, is it a power forward, center? Overall, let's say the Grizzlies makeup as a whole. If they go get a center in the draft, can that center be a starter? Even if he's not a starter, do you think they potentially go get a center in the free agency? How do you think all this shakes up? Because obviously it's you're peeling back the onion one thing at a time. But if you look at, you know, this offseason and what they do in either the draft and how that affects free agency and all the above, you know, what's your thoughts on the direction they actually might go?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear they're going to add at least one big, maybe 2, right? How they do that, that's the question we all want to know. I think that there maybe like Donovan Clingan could come in and play pretty significant minutes as a rookie, and it wouldn't be bad. Maybe similar to Derek Lively and kind of what he did for the Mavs this year, where like not perfect, can't start all the time, but really impactful minutes, and he doesn't look like a rookie out there. You know, there's the swings you can take with Jared Allen if that's what they want to do. The price seems a little high for me to pay for a center.
Yeah.
I think centers are typically they're not a dime a dozen. That's not fair, but you can get a replacement level center at generally a pretty low cost, right? Like they found Trey Jamison in the G League, and he looks like he can give you 15 minutes a night in the NBA if you need him to. So I think my best guess is they kind of go fairly low key with the big acquisitions, and then maybe look to take a swing at a wing or a guard with really plus size who could play with Ja and Desmond. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I think they kind of keep it low key, maybe not the huge splash for the big, but maybe look for, I don't know, Mikal Bridges or something like that, you know, to really put the team over the top.
I don't think the big splashes come with the center, just as you were saying. Nate, any final questions you got before Chip gets out of here?
How dare you take Clingan over Day'Ron Holmes? How dare you do such a thing?
Not bad.
No,
that's on me. That's on me. Yeah, that's on me.
No, I appreciate you coming on. It's always interesting to see things like that for someone like myself, who's notoriously not fond of the biggest name bigs in this draft, being Clingan and Edey. But having a guy like Ryan on last week, who I don't even know if Clingan made his top 20, if it was at the very end of it, and then you have him in the top 6, right? So just interesting to see all the perspectives.
Yeah, so Clingan's at 14. I know it's ugly to see that and the way it reads, but yeah, 14 there for Ryan on his big board.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see all the perspectives there.
All right, Chip, anything else you got before we end it? Because obviously we kind of picked your brain, but is there anything you want to kind of talk about or anything hit on before we leave?
Oh man, no, I appreciate you guys doing this. This was a ton of fun. I guess last thing I'd say is Jamal Shed from Houston, one of my favorite guys in this draft. If you're looking for a TJ McConnell mold player, you're going to find it in Houston's Jamal Shed. That's I'm kind of planting my flag and saying of all the second round old point guards, he's going to be the guy to stick. So that's I'll give you a prediction there at the end. How about that?
Wasn't there a guard in Houston last year that kind of same kind of scenario, you know, that came into the league this year?
Marcus Sasser, yeah, he's at Detroit. He was all right too. He wasn't too bad. I think Detroit fans hated him, but most rookie guards are bad, so just give him some time. It'll be all right.
Most everything in Detroit is bad. I think it's more of the place than it is the actual players. So, all right. So next time you'll see Chip with us, we'll be actually on draft night. We're going to go through the entire lottery. And so we'll get you where the Grizzlies are drafting. After that, we'll kind of go to quad box. And then us 3 plus Ryan will be kind of talking through the rest of the lottery. And every time somebody is drafted, we'll make sure our guys kind of give you a little bit more insight on them. But leading up into the Grizzlies draft pick, we're going to be breaking down each and every player that gets drafted, maybe how they affect their team, but then continuously coming back. And then obviously it's going to be fast paced because there's 5 minutes between every pick. We're going to have to give you our thoughts on that pick that just happened and then get you to the next pick. And so we're going to be back and forth. So it's going to be a fun-filled show. I know there's other shows out there, but I promise you this might be your favorite one. So don't don't tune it out, baby. We're going to be here for sure. But that's everything for Chip, for Nate. I am Daniel. We'll be back here next Tuesday night. We're bringing on the Black Ninja DJ for his debut. We're going to talk about all the draft again the night before the draft. But that's all we have. We'll see y'all next time. Be nice and tell your friends.